You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the Radical Majid Nawaz. And as is on your screens right about now, you can see the topic for today's stream. Reform Party leads national polls for the first time as Nigel Farage looks set to become the Prime Minister of Britain. That is the headline news as we speak. It is in your newspapers. You can see that on your screens now. In the Times, Reform, as the headline says, dated on the 3rd of February, Reform takes lead over Labour for the first time. A poll shows support for Nigel Farage's party is growing and the Conservatives are falling further behind. That same Times article, to read a extract for you from it, states, as you can see, dated 3rd of February 2025, Reform UK has overtaken Labour for the first time in a national opinion poll and has the backing of almost a quarter of those who voted Conservative at the last election. The YouGov survey puts Nigel Farage's party on 25%, 1 point ahead of Labour and 4 points ahead of the Conservatives, who are at their lowest level since losing power in July. Now, the Reform lead is within the 1% margin of error. Nevertheless, this lead in a nationally recognized poll by YouGov, a well-recognized polling company, will have consequences. It will, of course, boost the Reform narrative and the view, as we, our regulars, will know here on Warrior Creed, have been forecasting since before Nigel Farage even won his seat in Essex, that he would be the Prime Minister. These results will boost the Reform Party's own narratives around that, around the fact that Farage will become the Prime Minister of the UK. And of course, they will also have an impact on the other parties, probably a negative impact on their own morale, especially the Conservatives. Sky News reports this as well. Here's the graphic for you. You can see there Reform UK with an image of Nigel Farage at 25%, having gained 2 percentage points. Labour at 24%, having gone down to 3 percentage points from the last poll. Kemi Badenoch there for the Conservatives at 21%, having gone down 1. The Liberal Democrats at 14%, and the Greens at 9%. Now, the other interesting thing with this is to see the surge in the Lib Dem support under their leader, Ed Davey, to 14%. That's an interesting one. A lot of those polled that would be Lib Dem voters at the stated 14% there may well be former Labour voters as well. And we have Nigel Farage on Sky News, having just shown you that Sky News graphic there, commenting on this recent poll, which takes Reform, his party, into the lead for the first time in the UK.
Here, but well done on the poll. You're number one at 25, Labor 24, Conservatives 21. Then it's 14 and 9, mate. We begin where we end where we began. The joint is wrapping itself around a movement for change.
Absolutely, and you know what? The consensus we've had for years doesn't work. Ordinary folk get poorer, our borders are open, excess migration changes our communities. People want strong, patriotic, real leadership that actually cares about ordinary people.
Now, if you notice there, he mentioned the borders, he mentioned immigration, and he mentioned populist policies such as to care for ordinary people instead of big corporates. These are the issues we're going to return to because they are what will inevitably catapult Reform into Downing Street. It is worth remembering this is something, as is stated here in this Radical Dispatch from the 21st of November 2024, preparing for PM, Nigel Farage appeals to Muslim voters. We've stated for a long time here on Warrior Creed and generally on Radical Media that Farage will become the Prime Minister sooner than most people think. And by way of a reminder here from a Warrior Creed stream last November, here we are saying precisely that this result was going to come about sooner than people think, with the caveat, of course, he's not yet Prime Minister, but he's well on his way there. Have a look at this. And these are the big issues of the day, and really the only national leader welcomed universally by all of these various protest movements is Nigel Farage, which is why we've taken the view that what this is indicating to us here at Radical Media, you can quote us on this if you like, we're quite sure of it, and we tend to generally be able to read these things correctly, is that Nigel Farage will become Prime Minister of this country sooner than most people think. We've been saying that for a long time before the general election, before he won his seat in Clacton-on-Sea in Essex. And there we have it. That was our forecast last November. Of course, we've been saying it from before last November, from prior to Farage even winning his seat in Essex. But that on video there was us saying it last November. And fast forward to today, and the scenario looks pretty much on track. As you can see, Farage leading the polls. He will be Prime Minister sooner than most people think. How, you may ask, could this possibly happen, considering that Keir Starmer is under no obligation to call an election? Well, that's what people are going to have to wait and see. The first thing coming up in terms of the how is coming up very soon. And that is that the UK is set to host a bunch of local elections. You can see here from Farage's own post, dated the 2nd of February. The local elections are due to take place in 88 days. Reform UK are hosting the biggest ever launch rally in modern British political history. Book your tickets early and join the thousands to be a part of history. So in 88 days, that's roughly 3 months, of course, just under, those local elections will have a huge impact on the fortunes of Reform UK. They will probably sweep most Tory councils, and that will, of course, catapult into the national imagination that Farage is well on his way to becoming Prime Minister of the UK. So those local elections will be launched, as Farage stated, by the largest political rally in modern history. And here is Farage's poster for that. You can see there him pointing at the camera in a bit of a Del Boy fashion from Only Fools and Horses, but nevertheless, there he is, Reform UK there with Farage's face on the poster with the Union flag behind him in the arena in Birmingham, dated 28th of March 2025. He's selling tickets. That's set to be a hugely popular event, and that's to launch their local election campaign, which local elections, as we say, are due in 88 days. But they will be an indication of just how popular Reform has begun. And it will be around the issues, because one of the issues that's going to catapult Farage and Reform further ahead of not just Keir Starmer's Labour Party, but way ahead even of the Tories, is this issue of immigration. Now, if you remember last time, we touched on it with this Times headline. You can see the date there, 28th of January. And it states, UK population forecast to reach 72.5 million by 2032. Subheading, migration drives up numbers with 10 million people set to arrive within a decade. And we said back then when we showed you that headline that this was a big deal. It was a major deal. We're going to quote for you from the article. The arrival of 10 million immigrants within a decade is projected to bring Britain's population to 72.5 million, according to figures published by the Office for National Statistics. By 2032, the population is forecast to grow by nearly 5 million people, an increase caused almost entirely by net migration. The natural change, the difference between births and deaths, is projected to be close to zero. So Keir Starmer wanted to bring down the staggeringly high migration numbers, his spokesman said in response. But that doesn't make too much of a difference, because very few people in the upcoming local elections will associate Labour with lowering migration. Keir Starmer can say what he likes. It'll be very difficult in the local election context. So keep in mind your local Labour councillors in areas where they're strong, like in London, will not be parroting Keir Starmer's anti-immigration message. So no matter what he says, Starmer says from the top that he wants to get a grip and get a hold of those numbers. That won't impact in these local elections. What potentially may have impacted in these local elections and therefore affected Reform's chances would have been if the Tories came out against immigration. But the Tories have instead, via Priti Patel's recent intervention, made matters a lot worse for them. Because, as you can see here from this graph posted by Matt Goodwin, you can see there he says net migration to June 2023. And you can see very clearly marked where Priti Patel became the Home Secretary and where Priti Patel left the Home Office. And the big red chunks are obviously representative of migration. Reform has commented on that because Priti Patel was interviewed precisely about her track record as Home Secretary when it came to migration. And you can see Reform's chairman here, Zia Yusuf, saying, incredible. Do you want to lower immigration? Priti Patel is demanding you apologize to her. This is the Tories being absolutely unrepentant in their own track record when it comes to migration. This, what you're about to witness, is the Conservative Party's H1B moment, a bit like when Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy came out against restricting legal migration. And it didn't do too well for Vivek Ramaswamy's political fortunes. This is Priti Patel doing exactly the same thing to her own political fortunes. Have a look at this.
With that graph as well. I'm not fine with it. I haven't said that.
Would you like to apologise to all the people that voted Brexit for the fact that you misled them in saying we're going to take back control of our borders and then you threw them open and let in millions of people?
That is totally distortionary and that's not true. And to be quite frank, we made it quite clear it'd be people from the rest of the world, people with skills based on our economy. And I think people should apologise for those who are saying that.
So that's Priti Patel not only refusing to acknowledge that under her, the Conservatives' immigration policy looked like this. As you can see, it went up and up and up and up, creating a mountain on the graph you can see on your screens right now. Not only refusing to apologize, but actually demanding an apology from everybody else who criticized their policy. And the argument sounded very much like the Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy H1B argument. And of course, we've already addressed that argument. And we're going to remind you of what we said in this Radical Dispatch dated the 3rd of January. Elon Musk tells MAGA to F your own face and censors users to promote more Indian immigration. Because, of course, the issue is that it is only the Reform Party that is able to get to grips with this question of immigration. As we mentioned just now, the Labour Party, no matter what Keir Starmer says, will be unable to do so on a local election level because, of course, Labour local council candidates will not be campaigning against immigration. It's just simply, that's just not going to happen. This is the left-wing party we're talking about. And the Tory party could have done so, but of course, you've just heard from Priti Patel what they believe their view on that is. And so it can only be Reform that will be able to articulate the following argument. It's on your screens now from that Radical Dispatch, the headline of which we just read to you from the 3rd of January. And we're just reading a quote to you from the article there in Radical Media. And it says, Musk's call seemed to woefully disregard how the H-1B visa process is being abused by globalists to apply downward pressure on domestic wages while attracting desperate foreign workers who will accept non-unionized wage slave conditions for jobs that would otherwise have to go to underemployed Americans with US labor rights and wage expectations. What you're seeing there is an argument that applies exactly to the UK situation as well. And Keir Starmer knows this, though, of course, as we've stated, will find it very difficult to convince his party apparatchiks to campaign for lower immigration when it comes to those upcoming local elections that are due to take place in 88 days. And this is why we put it to you that Nigel Farage's Reform Party is going to continue rising and not only hold its first place position, but continue to rise, because this immigration debate, it really is huge. And a lot of people on the left of the political debate are going to have to come to terms with the fact, and people from ethnic minority communities are going to have to come to terms with the fact of what we've just stated here, that this is actually a workers' rights argument against immigration. Because, as we've stated in the Radical Media quote we just read, it puts a downward pressure on domestic wages while attracting desperate foreign workers who will accept non-unionized wage slave conditions for jobs that would otherwise have to go to underemployed Americans with US labor rights and wage expectations. Apply that to Britain, and it's the same point. People from working class backgrounds and people from ethnic minorities who are competing for the same jobs but are in Britain are either have or will very soon, but probably already have realized that unrestricted, ongoing, long-term immigration only directly serves corporates, whereas it undermines their own wage expectations directly, because it brings in workers who are prepared to work in non-unionized jobs that create a downward pressure on wages while prices continue to go up due to the policies of consecutive governments, the printing of the money, not only under Labour, but also before that under the Conservatives, creating inflation and all the other pressures economically with costs going up, and especially Trump's trade wars that he's launching against countries such as China and blocs such as the EU. This problem will only get worse for everyday workers, among whom, of course, ethnic minorities are a key part. And so this isn't a right-wing argument to talk about immigration, but try explaining that to Labour. Not going to get anywhere. And of course, we've just showed you that the Tories don't care about that, but are rather demanding an apology in the other direction. And this is why the Reform Party will continue to surge. Keir Starmer realizes he needs to try and keep both Trump and the EU on side to chase growth. But of course, again, that's not going to translate well when it comes to those local elections in 88 days on the local level. Local Labour council candidates are not going to campaign for trying to keep the balance between the EU happy and Trump happy. So Starmer really isn't really going to succeed in any of the messaging that he's putting out in an attempt to hemorrhage support to reform. And the Tories aren't really even trying to do so. And here is Farage on Starmer's recent visit to the EU. He said the EU has invited Keir Starmer to a leaders' summit in the very building where Ted Heath signed away our sovereignty in 1972. This is deliberate and humiliating. Starmer has learned nothing from the Brexit vote, and it will come back to bite the Labour Party. And then Farage posted an image there of Ted Heath in 1972 signing away Britain's sovereignty, and there's Starmer in 2025 signing away what one presumes is a reference to Britain's sovereignty again. And the Times article we read to you today that we showed you earlier about the fact that Reform have taken the lead. There is the headline again: Reform takes the lead over Labour for the first time, dated 3rd of February. To read a quote from that article on the impact of Brexit voters, again, it demonstrates that only Reform stands a great gain from the current status quo. The quote's on your screens now, dated 3rd of February from the Times. Farage's party also has the support of almost half of those who voted to leave the EU, as he solidifies its position as the first choice among those who backed Brexit. The Conservatives slipped to 30% among Leave voters, with Labour on 11%, and Reform with 46% of that group. So clearly, when it comes to issues such as sovereignty, Brexit, trade, reform leads by a whopping 46% among those that voted Brexit. And you can see there, even the Tories only have 30% among Leave voters, and they will continue to hemorrhage votes so long as people such as Priti Patel continue to speak like this.
That graph
as well. I'm not fine with it. I haven't said that.
Would you like to apologise to all the people that voted Brexit for the fact that you misled them in saying we're going to take back control of our borders, and then you threw them open and let in millions of people?
That is totally distortionary, and that's not true. And to be quite frank, we made it quite clear it'd be people from the rest of the world, people with skills, based on our economy. And I think people should apologise for those who are saying that
they'd like an apology. What's probably going to happen, as you can see from that same Times article, 3rd of February, that's the one we just showed you, to read another extract from it, about 1 in 4, that's 24% of those who voted Conservative at the last election would vote now for reform. But that's how far Priti Patel's apology is going to get her. While 43% of Tory supporters would be in favour of the two parties merging, with just 31% opposed. The writing is on the wall. It is pretty much over for the Conservative Party because the momentum has been lost by them, clearly, and has gone instead to reform among their average everyday voter. As for Labour, they continue to hemorrhage, and they realise this, which is why one of the ways in which they're seeking the uni-party globalist security state is seeking to stop Farage, as we've mentioned before on Radical Media, is by going for the angle of racism, anti-Muslim bigotry that they term Islamophobia, and so on and so forth. So it's no surprise that you can see there that the Times reports on the 4th of February that headlined Angela Rayner could appoint Tory to lead counsel on Islamophobia. The former Attorney General Dominic Grieve is tipped to chair a panel that will advise ministers on the issue. And we're going to read to you a quote from that article there. The Advisory Council will sit within Rayner's portfolio in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. The former Conservative Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, has been recommended to lead the council. So the Tories and Labour are seeking to work together on things such as the definition of so-called Islamophobia, which is a misnomer. It's more accurately known as anti-Muslim hate. And they are seeking to pin such accusations of racism and so-called Islamophobia onto the Reform Party by throwing enough mud in the hope that it sticks. If you remember, we mentioned part of the plan, as you can see from this Radical Media, Radical Dispatch, dated 29th of Jan, headline, child-killing terrorists, Axel Rudakabana convicted, and 10 million immigrants arrive in Britain over a decade. In that dispatch, we mentioned to you the following, and that it's you can see there from the 27th of Jan, the Times headline, two-tier policing claim is extremism. Home Office review suggested that the globalist security state will be seeking to reform the UK's counter-extremism policy known as PREVENT in order to reclassify, claiming, for example, that there is two-tier policing in the UK is an extremist claim to make, so that they can capture Nigel Farage, who uses this phrase often, under the UK's counter-extremism policy. Another thing to read from the article, the document also says that right-wing extremists frequently exploit the grooming gang scandal, described as alleged group-based sexual abuse, to promote anti-Muslim sentiment. Again, you can see that they will be looking to expand the definition of extremism to capture any conversation around the underage rape grooming gangs and two-tier policing in that regard. And that is how they will aim to stop Farage and the momentum that his Reform Party has gained. And that is why Farage, and we'll play it again for you now, recommended an overhaul of the counter-extremism policy and stated that it's no longer fit for purpose, something we've said 9 years ago, and therefore obviously agree with Farage on. Have a look at this.
So my son says it's the Amazon killer because the 17-year-old Axelar bought the knife online through Amazon. This is utter nonsense. Every kitchen drawer has half a dozen weapons that could be used for mass murder. The government are saying they'll bring in tough legislation. This is all a cover for the fact that I was right last July when I said that I suspected this growing black voters.
Sorry, we will replay that for you now.
So my son says it's the Amazon killer because the 17-year-old Axelar bought the knife online through Amazon. This is utter nonsense. Every kitchen drawer has half a dozen weapons that could be used for mass murder. The government are saying they'll bring in tough legislation. This is all a cover for the fact that I was right last July when I said that I suspected this man was known to the authorities. He was. Prevent, the anti-terrorism group, didn't do their job. The truth was denied from us. The police were told they couldn't tell us about the man's background. Now we learn even the Conservative Party front bench knew the truth. No one was told, despite on previous occasions us all knowing whether the person had been known to the authorities. This murderer is a terrorist, even if Keir Starmer won't call him it. And frankly, what we're seeing is one of the biggest cover-ups in the history of our country. We're living in two-tier Britain. It's a disgrace. And I'm going to...
So, not being able to stop the momentum for reform, the uni-party state will come at reform and Farage with the racism allegations, in particular on the immigration debate, with the anti-Muslim allegations, in particular on the underage rape grooming gang scandals debate, while obviously trying to keep up with the speed of such developments. Of course, Farage insisted by the end of January on a national inquiry into underage rape grooming gangs and said he had the funding for it. The uni-party globalist security state panicked to such an extent that they ended up announcing their own inquiry, except theirs isn't statutory, though it will be a local council by council inquiry around the country, not a national statutory inquiry with legislative power to enforce its conclusions and demand attendance. So they're constantly trying to keep up with the issues raised, while, of course, seeking to reform the counter-extremism prevent strategy to charge Farage with accusations of extremism, all in an effort to stop his momentum, which, frankly, is not going to stop, because Farage has recognized that to alienate and antagonize Britain's Muslim voters will only serve the trap that they have lain for him, and was therefore smart enough not to fall for the trap that stage name Tommy Robinson set for him by publicly endorsing stage name Tommy Robinson as some form of champion for the underage rape grooming gangs. And here is Farage stating a while back now on the Winston Marshall show his understanding of the British electorate, and that these elections, general elections in the UK, are won from the centre ground, and his refusal to fall for the trap of casting him as somehow a racist or an anti-Muslim bigot. Have a look at this.
Growing black voters, even some imams.
Well, he won the Muslim vote. He didn't win the Jewish vote, but he won the majority of Muslims.
Because he believes in family values and I mean, you know.
As Trump commenting on, Farage commenting on Trump having gained the Muslim vote by finding common ground, such as in issues such as family values. And we're putting it to you, that's exactly what Farage has realized here in the UK as well. And then this was us appearing on that same show on the Winston Marshall podcast, commenting on Farage's recognition that Muslims will end up forming a key factor in splitting the Labour vote, and also in encouraging the floating voters towards reform.
Now, the reason Farage would get, let's call it white van man and Brexit voter, I think that's a point that we would be labouring if we went into that. It's well known why he appeals to those voters. Why am I saying does he appeal now to ethnic minority and British Muslim voters in particular? Because like Trump...
Sorry, we'll play that again for you.
Now, the reason Farage would get, let's call it white van man and Brexit voter, I think that's a point that we would be labouring if we went into that. It's well known why he appeals to those voters. Why am I saying does he appeal now to ethnic minority and British Muslim voters in particular? Because like Trump, Farage has listened and made the effort to say certain things that have resonated in those communities in a way that, unless you're in those communities, you wouldn't know. Through the WhatsApp groups, through the family gatherings. One of them that resonated in a way that people are underestimating is what he said right here with you on your very show. And that was when you asked him about the place of Muslims in Britain and the place of Muslims and Islam in our future as a shared identity. And he said, if you go to war with all of Islam, you're going to lose. Farage is turning down Elon Musk's 400 million and saying, I'm not for sale, and I'm not going to let stage name Robinson into the Reform Party, comes after British Muslims already observed that Farage left UKIP, his own party, for the very same reason, citing Tommy Robinson. That's in The Guardian, everybody can go. The reason Nigel Farage left his own party, UKIP, that he was leader of, was over this stage name Tommy Robinson debate. He's done the same now again with Reform. He's turned 400 million down with for coming from Elon Musk to allow stage name Robinson back in or into Reform. These sorts of gestures, they are meaningful and they resonate among British Muslims in ways that are yet being underestimated. What he said on your show about do not alienate all of Islam, do not go to war with all of Islam, it's a losing bet, that resonated with British.
So, despite the fact that as you can see here, with the Uni-Party globalist deep state seeking to ramp up their conversation around Islamophobia by the Labour government appointing a Tory former minister to lead that the new council on so-called Islamophobia, their angle is clear. And as you can see here, on the reform of their counter-extremism policy known as Prevent, again, including elements of the Reform Party's own campaigning lines under their new definitions of extremism. Their angle is clear, but Farage refuses to fall for the trap. Farage has made it very clear on that very Winston Marshall podcast that we just played a clip from, that he refuses to go to war against and alienate all British Muslims. And that's why he turned down Elon Musk's 400 million offer to allow for stage name Robinson back into the Reform Party. So Farage he understands the game at play and is avoiding falling into those traps that they're laying for him in an attempt to subvert the momentum that the Reform Party has already built. So to summarize, Reform are ahead. They're going to stay ahead because of the immigration debate and efforts by the Uni-Party globalist state to turn that into an issue of racism and anti-Muslim sentiment. Farage is aware of and will not fall for their trap on. In addition to all of that, what's also going to further aid Reform is that the Labour Party will collapse and capitulate votes in these upcoming local elections. And again, from the same Times article that we showed you right at the start, the one that actually states that Farage is now taking the lead over Labour for the first time. Here it is again on your screens. Reform takes lead over Labour for first time, dated 3rd of February. From that same article comes the following paragraph. The poll shows that only 60% of people who backed Labour in July would do so now, while 18% say that they would either definitely or probably not support the party. In contrast, 86% of Reform supporters said they would still back their party. So again, in these upcoming local elections in 88 days, Labour's support is hemorrhaging to an abysmal, seriously damaging extent. And again, this is something that we have forecast before on Radical Media, because when Keir Starmer first won the general election, this is what we had to say. You can see the graphic on your screens now. We'll publish all these receipts as usual in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch. This is from a previous Radical Media. We're just going to read what's on the screen. This was the most marginal. This is, of course, what we're talking about is Keir Starmer's last general election victory, right? And explaining why Labour's vote is set to collapse, because it's nowhere near the landslide victory that people believe it is. And we're going to explain to you why. So first, you look at this graph, and we're just going to read to you. This is from a former Radical Dispatch. It says this was the most marginal general election since 1945. That's the one we just had in the UK. That general election was the most marginal victory that we've had since 1945. Even Starmer's own vote in his own seat was slashed by nearly half. The most acute marginal losses in terms of votes for Labour came from Britain's Muslim communities, which were, until recently, deemed the core of the Labour vote. And you can see this graph, and it states there by the person that's posted it, all of the biggest swings against Labour last night, which is from the last general election, happened in seats with the biggest Muslim populations. Britain's Muslims have completely gone off the Labour Party under Keir Starmer, and so they will also not fall for the traps that the uniparty globalist state is laying to try and cast Reform and, by extension, Nigel Farage as racist and somehow anti-Muslim. And this is something, again, we explained on the Winston Marshall podcast to Winston, and we're just going to play it for you because it's self-explanatory just to listen to it.
Called Labour landslide under Keir Starmer is not a landslide if you truly understand the first past the post system that we're living under. Yes, he's got a huge majority of seats in Parliament, but you win those seats by winning elections in each constituency across the country. By how much did he win those elections in each constituency across the country? Well, people will be surprised to know that was the narrowest marginal victory since 1945. Starmer's victory was so marginal that the current Secretary of State for Health, Wes Streeting, won by only 500 votes. In other words, the man running our health system is propped up by a difference of 500 votes. In party political terms, that isn't marginal, that is a nightmare. That is a nightmare, right? 500 votes is nothing politically, nothing. And the person that came within 500 votes to him, Liane Mohammed, wasn't even party affiliated. She was an independent. That's how bad it is for Labour out there.
They only won 20% of the electorate.
Yeah. Now, today in the press is news that Reform is on par with Labour in opinion polls, right? And
of course, they're not on par anymore. They are way ahead because, of course, the news has developed since that show was aired. And again, here's the graph for you. Reform is now leading the polls in the latest YouGov poll. But that clip explained for everybody exactly what we think is going to happen. To summarize it, what's going to happen is Britain's Muslims have turned against this Labour Party under Keir Starmer. They're going to split the vote in those marginal seats. This is the most marginal election since 1945, and the most marginal seats in the last general election that was the most marginal since 1945 were in areas where the Muslim vote made the difference. So Labour Party has been propped up in this country in local council elections, especially by Muslim voters. A lot of those Muslim voters no longer trust the Labour Party due to issues such as Gaza and Keir Starmer's stance over the ongoing killing in Gaza, but also due to other issues, including, of course, this very easy to understand point that if wages are going down due to unrestricted, continuing, long-lasting, long-term migration, then it's those working communities that suffer due to the downward pressure on their wages because they have to compete for the same jobs with people who've just arrived and who are prepared to do the same work for far less because they're a lot more desperate, and they're prepared to do it without any union backing because they simply want to work because they've just arrived in this country from countries that may not necessarily have a job for anyone, let alone for them. Obviously, these factors mean that working communities, among whom, of course, many Muslims, will turn against Labour in the local elections, including, of course, we mentioned Gaza and the distrust for Keir Starmer over Gaza will be the issues of the economy and immigration. And to summarize how these local elections in 88 days are going to go badly for Labour and, of course, badly for the Tories, here's another clip from the conversation we had with Winston Marshall, just to summarize it nicely in conclusion, because this is genuinely what we forecast is going to happen in these local elections. Reform is going to surge.
Sorry, forgive me, I'm being slow on this, but it seems like a bit of a contradiction, unless I've misunderstood, which is that it's not actually that British Muslims will vote for Reform and support Reform, but rather, which is what I had understood earlier, but it's rather they're going to split the Labour vote. And so actually, Reform isn't a vessel for British Muslims.
No, it's both. So those that were left-wing and would have voted Labour anyway are not going to vote Labour. Those that would have traditionally voted Tory, and lots of Muslims do traditionally vote Tory as well, will not vote Tory. They'll vote Reform.
Okay.
Those who are floating voters, Nigel Farage has captured their attention because of things like what he said on your podcast. So, and a lot of Muslim voters are floating voters, and he'll attract them too. What I'm suggesting is that Labour will underperform because they'll hemorrhage the Muslim vote, and Nigel Farage will overperform because he will attract the Muslim vote from the floating voters while also securing the Muslims that would have voted Tory.
I see. Well, Majid, we've covered a huge amount in this conversation.
He will also be Prime Minister of this country sooner than people think.
Sooner than 2029?
I won't put a date on it, but Nigel Farage will be Prime Minister of this country sooner than people.
And that is still the view that we are going to stand by, and we think that's pretty much going to happen. So to conclude, Reform takes the lead for the first time in this country, ahead of everybody else, including the party of government, the Labour Party. Though there is a margin of error, and this poll is within the margin of error, it will continue to build momentum for Reform. The local council elections that are coming up in 88 days, for which Reform is organising a huge rally in Birmingham, will continue to build Reform's momentum. These local elections that come, Reform will do far, far better than many people expect. The Tories will suffer due to being punished for their track record on immigration, their track record on inflation, their track record on COVID and tyrannies. And of course, the Labour Party, being the party of government, will suffer in these local elections due to their own track record on everything from immigration to spending, the economy, and free speech, and all of the issues that we've raised. Reform will be a beneficiary in these upcoming local elections in 88 days, which is under 3 months, and that will continue their surge until Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister of this country, which will be finally, and for once, for most of our lives, at least since the victory of Tony Blair in this country, it will finally be a regime change when Farage wins, because since Blair won in the 90s, we in this country have been under one state-led government. That's the uniparty globalist government. It didn't matter whether the Conservatives or Labour won. We were always under the same government, and they have driven this country into the ground. What we are going to witness in the UK is very much a populist uprising against the uniparty globalist state, pretty much the way in which America has witnessed it via MAGA. Let's also remember that though America is the larger and more impactful country when compared to the UK, Brexit as a phenomenon did precede MAGA. Nigel Farage as a political phenomenon did precede MAGA. And so this isn't so much Farage copying Trump and the US, but rather Farage staying the course that he began many years ago. And that is why he's so well positioned on all of these topics to benefit in these upcoming elections in 88 days. And as we've said, because the last general election in which Starmer won and that media touted as a landslide victory, because the truth is, as we've demonstrated with receipts and will publish again in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, that was the most marginal election victory in this country since 1945, and that all of the biggest swings against Labour in that general election happened in seats with the biggest Muslim population. That's why the way Muslims vote in these elections, the local ones coming up in 88 days, will matter, because they are the ones that make the difference in the margins. Very much like, as Farage acknowledged in the clip we played for you earlier, that the Muslims of Michigan swung it for Trump in the key swing states. The youngest and fastest growing demographics in the West, all over the West, are Muslim voters. That's why you see such hatred in Likudnik Zionist-backed global narratives against Muslim presence in Europe. That's why you see controlled opposition voices who are indeed paid assets, people such as stage name Tommy Robinson, people such as the failed actor Lawrence Fox, seeking any opportunity to stir up civil strife against Europe's Muslim populations. It's because they fear the way those Muslims are going to vote. and they're seeking to alienate Muslims against the rest of society. It's why people such as the failed actor Lawrence Fox jumped so quickly onto blaming the Southport child murder, the mass killing, onto a fake Syrian refugee asylum seeker named Ali Shakati. There was no such perpetrator. It was instead, of course, Axel Rudakabana. It's why stage name Tommy Robinson was so keen when that incident happened to incite online for people to go to those hotels. And of course, hotels got burned. They were seeking to set the trap for Farage so that he would be sucked up into this anti-Muslim sentiment and be unable to win the elections because, of course, elections are always won from the center ground. Farage did not fall for the trap. Farage understands that the key marginals in the UK, again, the graphic is on your screen, all of the biggest swings against the Labour happened in seats with the biggest Muslim populations. And if this has been the most marginal general election since 1945, all it takes is for those Muslims to swing against Labour, the floating Muslim voters to vote for reform, and the ones that are left-wing to vote for the Lib Dems instead. And you can see how reform cuts through the middle. And of course, that's why we said keep an eye on Ed Davey and the Liberal Democrats there at 14%. They will take the Labour vote, as will the Greens. And that's the left-wing Muslim voters in those key marginal seats, and all the generally the left that would vote for the Lib Dems and the Greens instead of Keir Starmer's Labour Party, which is effectively another Blairite and therefore globalist uniparty administration. The reform, the floating voters and the right-wing voters will vote reform. They won't vote Tory. Priti Patel has pretty much made that, pretty much sealed that deal for everybody, but not least if you also look at Kemi Badenoch and how unpopular she has become under the Tory party has become under her leadership, you can see it here that 43% of Tory supporters would be in favour of the Conservative Party simply merging with Reform. What that points to is that it's Nigel Farage's leadership that the voters are happy with, not Kemi Badenoch's, who is currently leading the Conservative Party. And you can see again here, all of those who voted for Brexit. That's 46% of the Brexit group backing Reform, with only 30% backing the Conservatives. This momentum is set to continue. And that is why we believe Nigel Farage is well on his way to becoming Prime Minister in this country, just as we have been saying from before he was even elected as an MP. And as we stated in the clip that we just played you at the beginning, we don't tend to get these things wrong. That's all we got time for this week for the Warrior Creed live stream. We'll be back next week during the regular time on Tuesday. And of course, as always, we'll publish all these receipts in the written Radical Dispatch tomorrow for you to look at with all the evidence, all the graphs of the swing states and all of that. We'll publish it tomorrow with additional content for premium subscribers, including updates on the US situation under Trump, the confirmation hearings, RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearing, Tulsi Gabbard's confirmation hearing, and much more for premium subscribers of Radical Media, who will also gain access to this podcast via Radical Media as well. All of that will be found at majidnawaz.substack.com. We thank our premium subscribers for their subscriptions. They gain the access to extra content, but without their subscriptions, of course, we can't provide any of the content. So we thank all of you who are premium subscribers, and we encourage all of you free subscribers to join Radical Media over at majidnawaz.substack.com. Until next time, you've been listening to The Radical Majid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.